Hello, ASEAN youngsters. Welcome to the second episode of the Talking ASEAN Podcast provided to you by the Habibie Center. This podcast is an initiative by the Center to bridge youth perspectives on various issues important to the region and to connect them with ASEAN better. So, 2023 had been a very interesting year. A lot of things happening inside and outside the region. But I think one of the most interesting thing that is happening this year is Indonesia's chairmanship. Of course, I'm biased because I'm Indonesian. But 2023's Indonesian chairmanship in ASEAN had been interesting because it is happening amidst two increasing competing narratives. The first narrative is that Southeast Asia is one of the most promising region in terms of economy. The World Bank and many economists see that Southeast Asia is among the brightest spots in the global economy after the pandemic. But at the same time, we also hear another narrative which is actually a bit different. The other one was very optimistic. This other one is quite pessimistic. We are seeing that many see the potentials of geopolitical conflicts, geopolitical tensions, which will crumble the development in the region. So which one is actually true, or are they actually happening simultaneously, and how? So this contradiction is actually also pretty much presented in the theme of Indonesia's chairmanship, the ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. It is an epicentrum of growth, but at the same time, ASEAN needs to convey that we are matter. We matter, please listen to us. So it's kind of answering to these two interesting, contrasting narratives. But today, we will look at how these two contradictions interact by starting at looking at the bright spot. We are looking at the idea of epicentrum of growth. How true is that? What does epicentrum of growth mean? What are the challenges for ASEAN to really continue and grow economically for the benefit of the people in the region? And for that, now together with me, and of course will be the main speaker for today, is Dr. Kiki Verico.
Thank you.
How are you, Dr. Kiki?
Good, very good.
Yeah, it's very good, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here, especially because Mas Kiki, is one of the leading economists in Indonesia, who really understands how Indonesia behave as an international economic actor. His book will be published soon, Pak, ya, on the Indonesian international economic strategies.
Yes.
He already published another book on ASEAN, which is very relevant for today in 2017 on the ASEAN economic community and the future of ASEAN economic community.
Yes.
Right, Pak?
Right.
Pak Kiki Verico is a senior researcher at the leading economic institution, the Institute for Economic and Social Research, or LPEM, better known in the Indonesian acronym, and at the University of Indonesia, and also a tenure track lecturer of the international economics in the same university. So, without further ado, I think I'll start with a question.
Yeah.
Epicentrum of growth.
Yeah.
Epicentrum usually refers to natural phenomenon. When we are talking about epicentrum, we are talking about the epicentrum of an earthquake, right? So it denotes a center of something that is happening. So by putting Epicentrum of Growth as the theme of this year's ASEAN chairmanship, what does Indonesia actually want? Does this mean that Indonesia believes that this region is the center of the global economy? Is it the belief that ASEAN is one of the most reliable machine of growth in the world?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for your kind introduction.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So if we look at the gravity or the center of power of economy in the world by looking at the data of merchandise trade globally, so we can see that the North America, which consists only 3 countries, Mexico, United States, and Canada, they cover around 22 to 25% and then European Union around 40%, and ASEAN around 22 to 24%, more or less. So same in terms of percentage as North America, but North America only 3 countries. So if you divide into GDP level, then of course they are much richer than ASEAN. But ASEAN play a very important role because 20% is not small. But the idea is the ASEAN has so many countries. But if you look at more details on ASEAN, we can see the ASEAN. I think the powerhouse regional economic integration and the contribution of these ASEAN could be around 40% out of that 22%. Yeah? So around 11% in the world. And from this contribution, I think Southeast Asia, because ASEAN, when we are talking about ASEAN, we need to also include, South Korea, ROK, Japan, and China. So ASEAN maybe like plus 3. So ASEAN maybe like around 7 to 8%. So it's huge. Not as huge as we compare other region, but this is one of the powerhouse. So if we are talking about how strong ASEAN, I think it's not only strong in terms of these organizations that giving more influential in contrast to European Union as a hard and regionalism, the legal binding. But ASEAN also has, with soft and open regionalism and regional economic integration that also very, significant contribution to the world, given that, contribution to the merchandise export of the world.
Yeah. So it's true that ASEAN is one of the most contributing part of the world to the global economy, but that is not the only factor why ASEAN is said to be the epicentrum of growth. It is also because ASEAN is, as you said, the powerhouse of regional integration, which is quite unique in the region, despite being relatively smaller economies than Japan, China, and Korea. It is the one who is actually leading the integration in the region. But that also, I think, creates the issue because compared to European Union, for example, or North America, which you mentioned, generally the GDP per capita are more equal. There are discussions when we are talking about ASEAN economy. Sometimes people pointed out that, well, ASEAN is not a single entity. You have Singapore there, which can be on par with many developed countries elsewhere. But you also have several countries like Laos or Cambodia or Myanmar. And recently, if Timor-Leste is accepted formally to be part of ASEAN, of course, it has different levels of development. So, do you think that is going to be a problem for ASEAN, and how ASEAN can deal with this to ensure that it is remaining a center of growth, a machine of growth, but at the same time remains the powerhouse for economic integration that benefits for all.
Yeah, thank you. So first that I explained before, that's from the point of the gravity, from the power of the regions. Next, we need to see the role of ASEAN as to call it puller of economic growth.
Puller of
economic growth. So when we are talking about the puller economic growth, there are two conditions that need to be fulfilled. Number one, emerging. What does it mean? Those countries must have economic growth, average economic growth, above global economic growth. So play as a puller. Number two is relies on manufacturing. Why manufacturing? Because manufacturing is the most strategic sector that manufacture from raw materials and influence the service sector integrations and service sector like global value chain and so on and so forth. So rely on manufacture or define as developing and have economic growth above global economic growth as a puller of economic growth, we call emerging. So emerging and developing. So when we put these two conditions, then Singapore is no longer in this classification because Singapore is an advanced countries with the service sector. Singapore is not relies on manufacturing. So when we are talking about manufacturing, then we need to make sure that this manufacturing has economic growth above global economic growth as a puller. So as a puller, let's say Indonesia, because 5%, global economic growth 3% per annum. Indonesia 5%, Malaysia 4.5% in the last 20 years. And then Thailand around 3.5%, and then of course Vietnam above 6% on average in the last and then not to mention Myanmar's above 7%, Cambodia Laos 6%,
despite the situation.
Despite the situation. Because I took 20 years back average, and then Philippines around 5%. So these countries because for Brunei Darussalam, I didn't mention because the economic growth is slower than global, and also not relies on manufacturing and relies on natural resources. So if you look at this, then we can see that most of Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN member states, they are emerging and developing. So when we are talking about the epicentrum of growth, so 8 out of 10 member states, fulfill this criteria.
And so they are basically the future of global economy because they are still emerging and
there's still room
developing.
for growth. So actually, global economic growth depends on this kind of countries, and with the regional economic integrations, strong, and it will give benefit not only for ASEAN but also to the world. And then if another thing that we need to use as a filter, so not only emerging, qualification, developing, but also impact. To see the impact, we need to see the size, the contribution of GDP of that member state to the ASEAN. And the highest contributions, the highest size in terms of GDP and also populations, of course, Indonesia. And another is like Thailand, 20%, Indonesia 35%, Thailand 21%, Malaysia around 12 or 15%, depends on the period of analysis, and Vietnam now 10%. But not only that, we need to see the changing of the size, because some countries experience increasing size contribution, but other countries decreasing. Because it's the economic growth, declining.
Getting slower.
Another is accelerating, So if you look at in 1%, let's say 2004, and 100% 2019 before pandemic, then we can compare only 3 countries that experience increasing contribution to ASEAN. Number 1, Indonesia, from 31 to 35%, comparing 2004 and 2019 before pandemic, and then Vietnam. Vietnam is the highest acceleration of contribution from only 5% in 2004, now 10%, almost equal to Philippines and just below Malaysia. This country, showing acceleration of growth very well. And then Myanmar, but Myanmar is small, from 1% to 2%. So only these 3.
So based on that assessment, I think it's not too far-fetched to say that, ASEAN is really the global center of growth, because you mentioned the basis of the economic growth, manufacturing is here, and generally the average economic growth is above the global economic growth, and still have rooms to grow, especially several countries that you mentioned. But you also mentioned that the impact on the regional economy is also an important marker, and another factor is also the connectivity, which could support the regional integration. But as we have learned, connectivity is not something that could be expected to be completed in itself, right? And it needs some efforts to do. And the pandemic also showed us that there are disruptions to connectivity which jeopardize global and regional economy easily. So what do you think, and how do you think is ASEAN in terms of connectivity?
Okay. So when you're talking connectivity, I think the most variable that we need to pick up is infrastructure. And infrastructure has two...
So physical connectivity.
Yes, physical connectivity. So this infrastructure needs or has two forms. One forms physical infrastructure, another form is digital infrastructure. So for physical infrastructure, I think the proxy now is not only the building or connecting, physically, but also logistic performance. And from this logistic performance, we can understand that because logistic performance has 6 indicators. The first 3 indicators relates to global logistic performance, which depends on the international. Not only, from the root of power of the ASEAN, like punctuality, timeliness, international shipment, and tracing and tracking, right? And number 4 is combination between public and private, which is called logistic services quality. And the rest too depends on the member state itself, which is custom services, and the other thing is infrastructure quality of the domestic.
So how do you evaluate ASEAN?
Yeah, of course, there is a divergence between the member of states. It follows us in line with the level of the member states, level of the economy. Singapore, of course, is the best in terms of this connectivity, because they are also already as an advanced countries with 65,000 US dollar per capita. So and then the rest follow the level of the country. Maybe number 2, the best, second best, Malaysia. And then Thailand, and then Indonesia. So all these countries that are still lag behind, they need to improve their connectivity, not only for say the connectivity, the logistic, the infrastructure, but also for their economic growth to support. That's why Indonesia in the last 10 years accelerate the infrastructure development that support the free flows of goods. And free flows of trade, of course, and that also influence, attractiveness for the investment. Yeah. So this connectivity, when we are talking, is actually the agenda of each member state. But at the end of the day, it need them, to connect.
It become a collective agenda.
Yes, that's from physical. Another one is from digital connectivity. Digital connectivity is very important, so like speed of the internet connection, the access for the internet connection, the coverage of the internet connection, satellite that service, or underwater cable network. This all also depends on the country. It depends on each country agenda for their development. But in case of Indonesia, that's very important because Indonesia has 60% of informal activities. So 60% out of 140 million labor force in Indonesia, they depend on non-formal activities, which is actually, that doesn't have a fixed income. They depend on digital activities like ride hailing, e-commerce, and then fintech and so on and so forth. These all need digital
infrastructure.
Yes, digital infrastructure for the inclusive. So bottom up. Physical infrastructure is, I can say, open from top down.
Yeah, because it's expensive, right?
Expensive, need government intervention. Yeah, and then
but I think there are also government interventions, right, on the digital infrastructure.
Yes.
Like, I mean, recently, I think this one is quite relevant for the ASEAN youngsters out there who is now very much globe-trotting or region-trotting. I knew many people are now like traveling to the region, like to other ASEAN countries, because visa is now free. We do not need visa to enter this ASEAN countries with a lot of tourist destinations. And now we can even like digitally use our like digital wallets to pay for souvenirs and many other things. So I think in that sense, connectivity is not something that is only in paper, but we do really feel it. I mean, if ASEAN is more connected, it is easier to travel. It is easier to do healing if you use the Indonesian youth words. So I think this is a very important aspect of the economy. However, as you mentioned, connectivity needs a lot of investment. You mentioned especially the physical connectivity, because it needs a lot of money. It needs a lot of investment.
Yes,
and of course that is not an easy task to develop. ASEAN itself has the, if I'm not mistaken, has the master plan for ASEAN connectivity. Do you have any evaluation on that master plan?
Yeah, I think there are several commitments at the regional level for the ASEAN connectivity, even including open sky policy and from free flows of goods. The thing is, this all connectivity has to support a free flows of goods in ASEAN. So free flows of goods is not only as I mentioned, from the 6 factors in the logistic performance. It's not only about the custom services that ASEAN implement after, like every several years and period, they have to adjust the tariff and then a list of tariff products, but also from the side of the infrastructure connectivity. And I think, as I mentioned, it's not infrastructure. There is no country that can develop their own infrastructure. Not to mention connectivity that across country, like
no one can go it alone.
Especially inland borders like Malaysia and Thailand, right? And then Thailand with others like inland borders of Vietnam and so on. And then Indonesia with Timor-Leste, for instance. So who's gonna develop this? Our government or the governments? When we are talking about the infrastructure, we are talking about this is for us and how much that we need to pay and so on and so forth. So the participation is the big challenge in this connectivity development. So international organizations like ADB, for instance, they also support the connectivity of the ASEAN. So I think with all these proxies approaches to develop the infrastructures and commitment, number one that we need to make sure is their commitment to develop, to build the infrastructure and connectivity at the common interest of ASEAN member states. So with countries with inland, I think is easier than country like archipelago like Indonesia, like Philippines.
Physically a bit separated from others.
And then of course we have to prepare ourselves, like Philippines also archipelagos, and then at the end, at the edge of the region, there's another challenge to connect, maybe more close to Brunei and Kalimantan, right? And then so there are types of connectivity that need to be discussed.
There are actually sub-regional connectivity projects,
exactly. That's the idea why how to call it, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, one of the
the IMTGT, the BIM,
and Mekong River cooperations. the idea is to support the free flows of goods, and then has to create or aim the win-win situations. Within the member states.
One of the most important initiative, and most comprehensive initiative to push for free flow of goods and people is the RCEP, the largest mega trade agreement, mega regionalism, and ASEAN is a leading part of it. So how do you evaluate the implementation of RCEP so far? I mean, it is the largest trading. I do not want to say it block, but largest trading agreement. But what actually it brings to the region? I mean.
So mega regional, if you look at the history, it emerged in 2010s, close to 2010 and after 2010. Before that, we are talking about bilateral or ASEAN Plus. So mega regional coming first, provoked by the TPP, right? And then CPTPP, and then the RCEP accelerate its progress. And in the RCEP, as you mentioned, ASEAN has ASEAN centrality. I have two papers discuss about the RCEP, one in the ASEAN economic letters, and another is with the ECS as a chapter of book. I try to compare the RCEP and the TPP and now CPTPP. I try to compare. I create an index to measure investment and intra-trade. I compare these two, and I found that intra-trade in the RCEP around 0.92, because close to 1 is perfect, 0.92, compared to the CPTPP 0.85. So it's more integrated in the RCEP. The reasons why, because all the member state the gap in the GDP per capita of the member state, the RCEP is lower than that
because the United States is not there.
And then compared to the CPTPP that more biased on developed countries, no. And then if you compare, I have another index is investment capacity. I found that both RCEP and CPTPP have index capacity above 1. That means above 1 is good. So I come into conclusion that RCEP is the best features for mega regional in Southeast Asia, because it's more integrated and it has capacity of investment, because above 1 the index that I calculate. So based on this, I strongly believe that the RCEP is the best for Southeast Asia, for ASEAN, because ASEAN also plays centrality in that, and all ASEAN member states become a member state of the RCEP. In the CPTPP, not all ASEAN member states, even Indonesia not a member state of the CPTPP. So comparing this mega regional power that try to influence each other in Southeast Asia, I think the RCEP is more naturally more close to ASEAN. So if you ask about the how important, the progress, I think very important, and the progress is positive.
The progress is positive.
Yes.
Indonesia, I think, ratified around after 2 years. Right?
Yes,
2 years and a half,
quite like behind.
I mean, do you think that affects the benefit from the RCEP? I mean, in easier terms, what are the practical impacts of RCEP right now for the people?
Number one, of course, market size, and then the RCEP. The RCEP is like EPA or CPA, but bigger, right? So this not only this region, mega regional, not only talking about trade, but also talking about investment, and then the connection between these two. So actually, they are talking about production network. So if we are talking about production network, I think in the RCEP by nature is already done because we have ASEAN plus 3. As China, Japan, ROK also parts of the RCEP. Only India, pull out from the organization. So it's clear to me that the foundation is very strong. But I have one note on it. To me, to accelerate this, we need a building block to make this total building stronger. What I believe is the bilateral. So Indonesia, Australia, CEPA, for instance. Indonesia, ROK, CEPA, for instance. It will be a building block.
So these bilateral,
bilateral
agreements are the building blocks of this regional, mega regional trade.
At least that's what I believe.
Yeah, that's interesting point, because our CEP is actually the the collection of these bilateral free trade agreements, right? Before.
Yeah, exactly.
And well, it's always interesting to talk with economists, because every sentence is data and very concise with information. It's blowing my mind. But I think, as you mentioned, maybe it is also important. You pointed out that there are two mega regional trade, one which involves the United States and one with is not involving the United States, and that hints me to probably look at this not merely in economic terms, and probably other factors are at play. I mean, do you think that like economic or geopolitical factors even is affecting the situation, affecting the economic situation in the region?
I'm waiting for this question. It's a very, very important and very interesting question. There is a book, 2 months ago discussed in the Bloomberg TV. The book written by Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of UK, Muhammad Al-Irani, and then Michael Spence, Nobel laureate economy 2001. The book titled Permacrisis.
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 A permanent crisis?
Something like that, but that's a plan to fix a fractured world. And in this discussion and in the book discuss extensively about the concept of inclusive. Inclusive is completed the free principle in ASEAN. Free principle that ASEAN have the Treaty of Amity Cooperations. That's a concept of free, right? And then free is without condition. Because in the terms of another terms, free is like democratic share value. This is a free without any conditions, that all ASEAN countries, for instance, can have economic cooperations with all countries, even not democratic allies.
So you are contrasting the idea of free in the free and open Indo-Pacific by the United States.
Yes, exactly.
Which connotes democracy and those kind of ideological underpinnings. And the inclusive, the idea of inclusive, which is free in terms of everyone is free to cooperate.
Yes, like ASEAN Outlook in Indo-Pacific. Right?
So Muhammad Al-Aryan is supporting ASEAN.
They are discussing about how important inclusive. And that shocked me, and it's really thought-provoking.
Because usually Europeans are very
now they are looking for something that exists in Southeast Asia, the inclusive. And if you are looking more details historically, you can see from the Dasasila Bandung Asia Africa conference in 1955. There are at least 3 principles that explain about this: non-interference principle, integrity, respect, and mutual benefit. So these all very important ingredients for the global economic cooperation or globalization in general. They root in here in Southeast Asia. This is what we provide, what we promote to the even like in between US and China. Geopolitical tension and so on and so forth. So we need all the countries around the world, across countries, to understand that if you want to have a peaceful, a win-win, or economists always mention about Pareto optimum situation. And then we need to understand we cannot make any discriminative action on this. We need to be inclusive, not only free, but also inclusive. I think that's very important now.
I think inclusive is one of the unique term that ASEAN frequently uses, like in the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. It's always saying the importance of the inclusivity. But as you mentioned, of course, it is not an easy process, right? I mean, in this climate of geopolitical rivalry, inclusivity is often perceived as weakness. Right? I mean, you are a friend of my enemy, so you might not be my friend, right? I mean, there are perceptions that, for example, some ASEAN countries are getting too close to the extent that many in the West see that these countries are already capitulating to China. So, what is the future in the region if we see this geopolitical rivalry? I mean, despite ASEAN's call for inclusivity, it seems that the geopolitical tension is increasing. We see the United States is, now starting policies of decoupling or de-risking, for example. That, of course, will have an impact to the region, right? So what do you think this rivalry practically will impact the economic development in the region? Will the United States try to kick China away? The United States will move its capital from China to Southeast Asia? Is there any benefit from this rivalry?
This is another very important question. So in the last 2 months, I attended one seminar in Seoul, East Asian Economic Association, and the speaker, Danny Rodrik. Another seminar I attend in Bali just last week.
Danny Rodrik is one of my favorite author.
and the speaker is Barry Eichengreen. I think, very very influential as well, speaker. So they are clearly talking about how the world try to soften the tone of the multipolar or fractured world in the moment, like changing from the coupling to the risking especially in the G7 meeting in Hiroshima.
Blinken changed the terms
to the risking. And the other thing is,
but China doesn't believe that. It's just language play.
But at least we can see another fact, like they changed the idea of reshoring, and also recently I heard from Barry Eichengreen last week is nearshoring. Nearshoring. So more softer, more softer the tone. That means, and then another thing, if you look at trade war, between the bluffing and the implementations of the tariff between US and China, the bluffing is set up high call. We will put this level,
but actually doesn't work.
So given this situation, I think all the countries. I do agree with this book that I mentioned before, the Burma crisis. Actually, the world really want a stable situation with, I can say, a win-win situation, equilibrium situations. Globalization is needed by all countries. It's like sugar to our body. We have to avoid high level, too much sugar, but we cannot live without sugar. So that's the globalization to me. And some big scholars, big name, they mentioned about the hyper globalization to globalization or slow globalization or steady state globalization. That means globalization is there, cooperation is there. So but
people are also talking about deglobalization.
Deglobalization, of course. From the people they are talking that, but from the government they see this. To me, is like too big to fail.
It's already
too big to fail because this already connected. Like you see who's which country the largest investors in China. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, United States, all democratic countries. And then China export to which countries mostly the products? Of course, from these countries. So the interconnection between these two is already too high, too big, and with the providing concept from our side, like inclusive, I think it's giving more power for this region to understand that if you do that, maybe for gimmick, maybe because of political campaign domestically in the US between Democratic Party
you have to appear strong,
and Republican, But actually, in business, in reality, in practice, in pragmatical terms, I think business, they cannot just do it, just do like really kick out and then decoupling.
Yeah. So you see that the rivalry is actually it's happening, but the impact is not that how to say dangerous to that extent, right? I mean, you mentioned how the economies are very much connected, and even when the government want to sever this relationship, it's difficult because actors are already connected to each other.
So I mean, sometimes from the government or political party side.
I remember Tim Cook protested Trump at the time during the trade war. But there is also, I have to say, some important initiatives like the semiconductor ban, right? Which is happening, right?
So, and another thing is CATL, supply of battery in the military base in the US. That's another issue But maybe for the semiconductor, another thing is about the technological war between.
So it's not only about trade.
Yeah, it's not only about trade and business, but more on technological. So more maybe for security issues, and then they need to make a certain gap in that, because that's influence the security.
So the US wants to decouple or de-risk, but especially in areas where technologies are the competitive edge of the United States against China. I mean, so it is important to look into details of the sector rather than talking about huge geopolitical and geoeconomic rivalry. In that sense, which sectors do you consider to be the most vulnerable in the region? I mean, well, you mentioned that US is going to do some de-risking, some nearshoring or friendshoring, not at all sectors, but probably in sectors with technological risk, etc. But what do you think will the impact be in the region?
I think I agree with you that you mentioned about technology, because decoupling, they have several forms, right? One form is political, or more on we call it maybe a school of thought between these regions. I mean, between the US and China, for instance. But more on that is more in technological aspect. That's called chip war, right? And then the chip war is because chip is very important for weapons, for all the technology. And for that case, I think there is a serious implication on that. And also makes sense if they try to limit the technological transfer that can change into part of the brain of the weapons. So it's more on this. That's why maybe chip productions more produced in Taiwan. And then I think there is a shifting, or not shifting, but maybe decreasing in producing chips, in China, but producing more in Taiwan. I think that's it. But for the ASEAN, the how to call it, the sector that mostly discussed, I think battery for electric vehicles. And that has two issues. One issue is technology, another issue is environment, because green economy, climate change, and so on and so forth, and to reduce emission of CO2 from the cars. And this another discussion, because for the establishment of the factories of battery in Indonesia, I think two countries have very important role, China and South Korea. And I think this sector has less geopolitical issues on it, because there's produce cars. But the question is still, is it the semiconductor or the chip will produce in China, or coming from South Korea, and or established Indonesia? Because these two countries is democratic countries. I mean, has a potential to get chip production.
So it is interesting that you mentioned that so you're very optimistic. I have to say. I mean, like in IR we tend to be less optimistic.
Yeah, so we are completing each other.
Because we see conflicts are increasing, and this decoupling, de-risking things are probably signs of that trend. But I mean, talking to you makes me more optimistic, right? I mean, and I do hope so. That I mean, in IR actually we have this theory of interdependence, the complex interdependence, in which the connectivities made by trade and people-to-people relations are actually becoming the constraint for a war, for conflict, because yes, actually this complexity creates an opportunity cost. It creates a cost for doing conflict. I mean, if you are doing conflict, you are actually hitting yourself on your foot. So so let's hope that that optimistic theory is right. But at the same time, you also mentioned the importance of inclusivity, and probably also I think ASEAN is trying to push this. So maybe I interpret that you are suggesting that ASEAN is not merely looking at this phenomenon, but actively promoting the idea of inclusivity. Do you have any other suggestion for ASEAN to ensure that the sustainability of economic development, economic cooperation continue despite the increasing strategic and geopolitical competition?
Thank you. So I wrote an article as a working paper, the 3 principles that ASEAN need, or four principles that ASEAN need to, keep to support its progress. Number 1, of course, Treaty of Amity Cooperations with the free principle. Number 2 is open principle, Bali Concord 2, 2002, which means that ASEAN is very open to other to other countries. But I think only in ASEAN we have organization or regional economic integrations that can add another country with the plus framework, right? ASEAN, China, plus framework. And then number 3 is convergence. Convergence is the basic for the ASEAN economic community, to decrease the divergence of because we have to make sure these regional economic integrations give benefits to all countries without any discrimination. So all countries need to receive the equal benefit, and that will make us stronger. And then number 4, I think I did hope that this principle become the 4th principle in the not in Bali, the last chairman in Labuan Bajo. No? So I imagine Bali Concord 1, Bali Concord 2, Bali Concord 1 free, Bali Concord 2 open, Bali Concord 3 convergent. I imagine there's another Labuan Bajo, maybe Labuan Bajo Concord, talking about the inclusive. But at least in the ASEAN outlook and Indo-Pacific, that ASEAN, voicing and crying out loud to, over to the world. I think the concept of inclusive, again, back to the inclusive, is not only for ASEAN, but also for the world. So with these 4 principles, I think ASEAN can, have a bright future. Back again, as the first question that you mentioned, that you asked about the, powerhouse, pillar of economic growth, and the center of the gravity. And with these 4 principles that the world needed now, we have already before in Dasasila Bandung Asia Africa Conference. I think it's a very bright future. Wow. I'm very optimistic.
Yeah,
I'm very optimistic.
It's always great to talk to Kiki because I can escape the pessimism of IR classes. Because I mean, you interestingly and convincingly say so that, well, ASEAN is indeed the epicentrum of growth. It is growing above the other regions. It is growing in terms of supported by manufacture. It is the puller of growth. It is contributing significantly to the GDP, etc. But at the same time, you also acknowledge that, well, geopolitics is there, but while geopolitics is there and great power rivalry does have some impact in slowing down like globalization, it is actually, we should not be too pessimistic, because the forces of integration, the forces of connectivity is actually working through the complex interdependence. But it is not a given thing. So ASEAN needs to ensure that the region continues to be inclusive. The region should not be subsumed into the great power rivalry. So ASEAN needs to take leadership. ASEAN people needs to be in the driver's seat to ensure that the concept of inclusivity remains at the center of the region. And you mentioned about the importance of Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which is the ASEAN. I think one of the most important crystallization of the ASEAN way, the way of ASEAN. And it is also heartening to see, it's warming to see that at least some parts of the world is listening. I mean, like, people are also learning from the region. Do you have any other
I want
comments?
to touch that you say as a drivership. I think it's very important, because ASEAN centrality also inside the core of the ASEAN outlook on the Pacific, and also as you mentioned before, and also you asked before about the RCEP, ASEAN also plays a centrality. I think the centrality of ASEAN as a driver's seat for the region is not only for the Southeast Asia member states, but also for landscape of, let's say, Asia Pacific, and
or Indo-Pacific.
seascape of Indo-Pacific. And then, of course, it will give a positive vibes to other regions. Like I mentioned, it's quite surprisingly, philosopher, I can say, scholars, big scholars, even Nobel laureates, when they discuss about the globalization, global economic cooperations, the challenge of this decoupling and so on, they are looking for the inclusive principle, and they are mentions literally inclusive that we have in our roots, right? So I think we can see with the world witness very vividly, very clearly, that in Indo-Pacific we can see a peace situation, at least no physical. And of course there's a bluffing influence by governments, maybe they influenced by the import, they try to get the support from domestic. If they make comment for external to get, especially in campaign period, like in the US, they are also like Indonesia at the moment, in campaign period, they need to has an international issue to get support from domestic. But beyond that, I think pragmatically, and even with the establishment of IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, it's clear to me.
Framework.
Framework. Yeah, it's clear to me that it's more practical. The proxy they use is more practical. The approach they use is more practical, more soft. Even no market access inside in the IPEF, but I see a progress of understanding too big to fail. We have to keep the equilibrium, a win-win situations, because at the end of the day, all countries cannot live by their own. They need globalization. They need working.
Thank you, Mas Kiki. It's very enlightening and giving positive vibes. If you mentioned, I mean, so it's not only ASEAN is the epicentrum of growth today and possibly the future, but also the epicentrum of optimism, rather than being trapped into Thucydides' trap, which is often seen as inevitable. ASEAN can actually leverage not only the region, but the larger region of Indo-Pacific and even beyond the world to the promise of Bandung, of the promise of equality, inclusivity, and happiness for everyone. Thank you very much
for having me.
Joining us today.
My pleasure.
Let optimism alive. But again, I have my IR part complaining, so I have to have some comments on that. Optimism is good, but it needs work. It needs. It should not be taken for granted. Let's avoid the Thucydides trap. Let's avoid the conflict. We need to ensure peace for everyone.
And cuan.
Oh, and cuan. That's very economist. That's very economist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thank you
very much. It's great to talk to you, and hopefully you can get benefits from this and share the optimism with everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.